On November 13th, 1999, in the city of Liverpool, England, a terrible event happened to a young man, Michael Moss, born in 1998. He grew up in a good family. However, he was never a diligent student and showed little interest in school subjects. Despite this, he had an exceptional technical mindset and remarkable dexterity. His mother, Liz, recalled that from an early age, Michael loved taking things apart just to understand how they worked. For example, he could disassemble his bicycle into pieces without any real need, and then put it back together as if it were the simplest puzzle. Over time, his passion for mechanics only grew stronger. He became fascinated with motorcycles, dedicating more and more of his free time to them. He studied every detail, read motorcycle magazines, and even attempted to repair old bikes he found in junkyards or bought for next to nothing. But the most important thing in Michael's life was his family. He was especially close to his father, with whom he had a warm and trusting relationship. His father was not only a parent, but also his best friend. They often spent time together, discussing everything from everyday topics to complex technical issues. It was his father who instilled in him a love for mechanics, teaching him how to understand engines, electrical wiring, and braking systems. It seemed that nothing could break this bond. However, fate had other plans. One terrible day, his father suffered a severe brain hemorrhage. This tragic event changed him completely. From a kind, caring, and gentle man, he turned into an irritable and aggressive person. Doctors explained that even minor brain damage could affect a person's personality and behavior, but this explanation did little to ease the pain for Michael and his mother. Each visit to the hospital became an ordeal. His father would erupt in anger for no apparent reason, shout at them, and sometimes even spit in their direction. These drastic changes frightened and deeply hurt Michael. He couldn't understand why the man who had once been his role model was now acting so cruelly without considering how much it hurt him. The memories of the happy days when they fixed cars together in the garage or rode bicycles through the park seemed distant and almost unreal, and when his father passed away, Michael's grief only deepened. Losing one of the most important people in his life was a devastating blow. This tragedy left its mark. Michael's behavior changed. He became more withdrawn, irritable, and unpredictable. He lost all interest in studying, and conflicts with classmates and teachers became more frequent. He was no longer the same person. Eventually, the school administration made the decision to expel him. The only remaining option was to transfer him to a special educational institution for troubled teenagers. Michael's life was gradually spiraling out of control. The pain of loss, problems at school, and years of pent-up anger drove him to seek an escape. He started spending more and more time in noisy company, groups where no one asked too many questions or tried to change him, mostly because they themselves had little to boast about. Around this time, he became fascinated with street racing and the thrill of speed, finding a strange kind of comfort in it. The roar of the engine, the rush of the wind against his face, and the adrenaline became his only way to disconnect from his inner turmoil. But along with this, his reckless tendencies also grew. Michael began participating in underground races, ignoring traffic laws, and taking dangerous risks. His actions became increasingly impulsive and life-threatening. He was searching for a way to numb the pain, but instead, he only sank deeper into the abyss. What lay ahead for him? Would he manage to overcome his inner demons, or would he completely succumb to his grief? Michael's behavior became an increasing problem, not only for himself, but also for his mother. Liz, already drained by the sorrow of losing her husband, struggled to cope with his bursts of aggression, withdrawal, and indifference to everything around him. She watched helplessly as her son gradually changed, becoming harsher, colder, and more uncontrollable. Every argument between them only widened the gap between them. Realizing that she couldn't handle the situation on her own, Liz turned to social workers for help. They suggested temporarily placing Michael in a specialized children's home where he could receive the support he needed while Liz could take a break and try to rebuild her life. Thus, in 1999, 15-year-old Michael found himself in an unusual facility. Unlike traditional orphanages, this one granted teenagers a certain level of freedom. They could leave at any time of the day or night, whether to visit relatives or simply go for a walk. The place resembled more of a dormitory for troubled youth than a strict reform institution. Around 25 minors lived in this facility, each with their own reasons for being there. Some had run away from home, others had legal troubles, while some, like Michael, simply didn't fit into the traditional education system. Before long, he met two boys who would become key figures in his story, Alan Bentley and Mark McKiffrey. These two were inseparable and had a reputation as local troublemakers. Both had been expelled from school after brutally beating a classmate, leaving him with serious injuries. While they were considered dangerous within the school walls, outside of it, they had not yet been convicted of any major crimes. At first, Michael had no desire to get close to them. He sensed that their aggression could spiral out of control at any moment, so he kept his distance. However, over time, their paths crossed more and more frequently, eventually leading to a sort of acquaintanceship. Not quite friendship, but not hostility either. Later, another teenager joined their group, 16-year-old Graham Neary. Unlike Alan and Mark, he wasn't as openly aggressive, but was weak-willed and easily influenced. He longed to be part of the cool crowd, and was willing to do almost anything to gain the approval of his new friends. Meanwhile, another unpleasant turn of events occurred in Michael's life. Alan was dating a girl, but in October of that same year, she decided to break up with him and started seeing Michael instead. This was the final straw. Alan was not the kind of person to accept defeat easily, especially when it came to his ego. From that moment on, he harbored resentment toward Michael and began plotting his revenge. On November 12th, 1999, Alan threw a party to celebrate his 16th birthday. The gathering took place at his house, and among the invited guests were Mark McKiffrey, Graham Neary, and another teenager, Neil Breslin. That evening, the group began drinking. Strong alcohol was on the table, and Quentin Tarantino's cult film Reservoir Dogs was playing on the TV. As the alcohol heated their blood, the conversations became more open and aggressive. At some point, when everyone was already quite drunk, Alan brought up Michael again. His voice was harsher than usual, and his eyes burned with pure hatred. He couldn't accept the humiliation, the fact that his girlfriend had chosen someone else over him. At that moment, under the influence of strong alcohol and his emotions, he made a final decision. No one in the room yet knew that this night would mark the beginning of a series of horrific events that would soon shake all of Liverpool. According to Alan, the only thing he wanted more than anything was to teach Michael a lesson, by any means necessary, for his betrayal. The other boys not only didn't try to stop him, but they eagerly agreed to take part in his revenge. At around 1 a.m. on November 13th, Mark McKiffrey called Michael. At that moment, Michael was in his room at the children's home, suspecting nothing. Knowing full well about Michael's passion for motorcycles, Mark used this interest to lure him into a trap. He told him that he was planning to buy a bike and wanted Michael to take a look at it and give him advice on whether it was worth purchasing. Michael, not sensing any danger, agreed. He informed the staff at the children's home that he would be stepping out for a short while and left into the night, unaware that this would be his final walk. They arranged to meet in an alley on the outskirts of Liverpool. When Michael arrived at the location, he immediately sensed that something was off. Besides Mark, there were two others waiting, Alan and Neil Breslin. Well, maybe they were just bored and decided to tag along, Michael thought, but his unease was growing. They all greeted him, but before he could say anything more or turn around, the boys suggested moving to a nearby park. It wouldn't be manly to refuse. they would think he was a coward. Once there, Alan wasted no time on words. He suddenly stepped up to Michael and without warning, delivered a powerful headbutt. The blow was so strong that Michael collapsed to the ground before he could even react or brace himself. Then Alan, with cold, methodical precision, began to beat him, kicking, punching. Like an animal unleashed, he struck Michael's head, ribs, and stomach, giving him no chance to recover. Neil soon stepped aside, as if he didn't want to see what was happening or was too scared. But Mark, on the contrary, joined in to help his friend. He stripped Michael of his clothes and, dragging his body away, threw him into a cold puddle, as if mocking his helplessness. Then the teenagers began attacking the most vulnerable and intimate areas of his body, cutting his skin with broken glass from a bottle as if they were playing a cruel game. This went on for about an hour. During that time, Michael tried to resist more than once, but his strength was leaving him. If only someone was passing by and heard, but there was nothing but silence around. Only when the boys grew tired did they leave him there and calmly head back home. But this wasn't the end. When they returned to Alan's house, Graham Neary was waiting for them. He hadn't taken part in the first attack, but he listened with curiosity as his friends proudly told him about what they had done to Michael. However, the conversation soon took a new turn. Someone suggested going back to the park to finish what they started. This time, Neil Breslin refused to go. He seemed to have had enough. But Alan, Mark, and Graham, consumed by hatred and their desire to see it through, set out for the park once again. When they returned, Michael was still lying in the same place, unable to move. He was alive, but in critical condition. He was barely breathing, his face covered in blood, his body full of deep cuts. He desperately needed medical help, but instead, the teenagers launched into another round of brutality. Mark, furious that Michael was still breathing, shouted, "Get up! Come on! Stand up, you weakling! Traitor!" But Michael couldn't. He could only groan in response, weakly attempting to move. That's when the teenagers began mocking him, as if their assault wasn't an attack but some twisted game. They picked up shards of glass and started drawing tic-tac-toe on his skin. Then, laughing, they began kicking his head as if it were a football. Alan even called himself a famous English footballer, waving his arms as if celebrating a goal. When that wasn't enough for them, Alan picked up a large piece of glass and, with a maniacal grin, attempted to cut off Michael's ear. He wanted to recreate a scene from Reservoir Dogs, the movie they had watched just a few hours earlier. These tortures went on for several more hours. According to the perpetrators, in the last 10 minutes, Michael no longer made a single sound or movement. At around 5:30 a.m., Mark, now slightly sobered up, made an anonymous call to the police. There was no panic in his voice. If anything, he sounded indifferent. "I found a teenager's body in the park," he reported and hung up. The police immediately rushed to the scene, but to their surprise, they found neither a body nor any evidence of a crime. It looked as if nothing had happened at all. It wasn't until 2 hours later, around 7:30 a.m., that an elderly man, walking his dog, stumbled upon Michael's mutilated body. He immediately called the police. When investigators began trying to identify the deceased, their first instinct was to check the nearest children's home. Whether it was intuition or sheer luck, the decision turned out to be correct. One of the staff members immediately recognized Michael. Meanwhile, his mother, Liz, was at home, trying to start the day as usual. She turned on the radio to distract herself, but instead of the familiar morning news, she heard an alarming announcement. "A teenager's body has been found in a Liverpool park." Liz froze. It felt as if something inside her had snapped. And just a few minutes later, she saw a police car pulling up outside her house. She already knew why they were there. As the officers stepped out of the car and walked toward her door, she stood motionless. Then, as if in a daze, she opened the door and saw the sorrow on their faces. "We are very sorry, but your son, Michael," one of them began. She didn't need to hear the rest. The message was clear without words. Her son was dead. Shortly after the body was discovered, Graham Neary arrived at the police station, accompanied by his mother. He looked distraught, his hands were trembling, and fear was frozen in his eyes. He confessed to taking part in the crime and revealed the names of the attackers. "I didn't want to do it," he said. "But if I had refused, they might have done the same to me." He described everything that had happened that fateful night in horrifying detail, leaving nothing out. He named all the attackers and recounted their actions with chilling accuracy. This was enough for the police to immediately arrest Alan Bentley, Mark McKiffrey, and Neil Breslin. Despite Graham's confession, the attackers denied any involvement from the very beginning. They insisted that they had nothing to do with the incident and that they were being falsely accused. This meant only one thing. The investigators couldn't afford to make a single mistake. They needed irrefutable evidence. While all three suspects were in custody, the police conducted thorough searches of their rooms at the children's home. The most shocking discovery came from Alan Bentley's room. Among his personal belongings, detectives discovered several drawings done in a dark, disturbing style. These were pages from a homemade comic book he had drawn in his spare time. The drawings depicted scenes of brutal violence, with one of the central figures being himself. In several images, there was a man eerily resembling Michael, subjected to horrific torture. It all looked as if Alan had been fantasizing about the attack in advance, meticulously planning every detail. While investigators were gathering evidence, forensic pathologists conducted Michael's autopsy. The results were shocking. The injuries found on his body did not just indicate a brutal beating. They were nothing short of monstrous. Michael had multiple broken ribs, numerous facial fractures, and deep cuts all over his body. In some areas, his skin had been torn away, and where the attackers had struck him with shards of glass, there were severe lacerations. The main cause of Michael's death was a broken neck. After examining all the injuries, the forensic expert concluded that Michael had not died instantly. He had suffered for several hours. This information became the final piece of the puzzle. Now the investigation had everything needed for the prosecution. At the crime scene, forensic specialists also found numerous shards of a broken bottle, which had clearly been used by the attackers during the assault. The most crucial discovery was that fingerprints were found on these shards. After laboratory analysis, they matched the fingerprints of Alan, Mark, and Graham. Since the perpetrators had primarily kicked Michael, his body was also covered in shoe print marks. Investigators conducted a thorough analysis and determined that the prints perfectly matched the sneakers confiscated from the suspects. These pieces of evidence definitively linked them to the crime. Having gathered all the evidence, from Graham's testimony to the fingerprints and shoe prints, the investigation reached its final conclusion. The police had irrefutable proof to charge Alan, Mark, and Graham with the murder of Michael. The trial of the young criminals began in July 2000. By this time, one of the attackers, Neil Breslin, had already pleaded guilty to participating in the first beating. However, since he was not present during the second attack that led to Michael's death, he was never charged with murder. Meanwhile, the other defendants, realizing the severity of the charges against them, attempted to put forward an absurd version of events. They claimed that Michael had supposedly asked them to attack him so that he could later collect insurance compensation. This ridiculous attempt to justify themselves was not taken seriously by the court. Prosecutors presented extensive evidence proving the defendant's guilt, along with witness testimonies that completely shattered any doubts. In the end, the court found all three guilty. Alan Bentley and Mark McKiffrey were sentenced to 10 years in prison, while Graham Neary, who cooperated with the investigation and expressed remorse, received a 9-year sentence. Many years have passed since the verdict, and all three offenders have long been released. Little is known about their lives after prison. However, Neil Breslin, who avoided serious punishment, did not stop at this crime. He later came to the attention of the police multiple times. In one incident, he and an accomplice attempted to rob houses, but the residents managed to fight them off. On another occasion, he was convicted of vandalism after smashing a window in his girlfriend's house during an argument. As for the rest of the perpetrators in this horrifying case, their current whereabouts and lives remain unknown. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, support it with a like, subscribe to the channel, and let's discuss the story in the comments.